Good evening, all. Welcome to another Peaceful Solution Character Education Teacher Certification course. You can be seated. All right. Hope everyone's had a wonderful and productive day, productive week. We're midweek now, or just over midweek, and we're moving right along. All right. Well, I hope everyone's been able to tune in and join us in our previous classes as we move forward here with the self-control unit, Unit 3 of the Character Education Intermediate Series. And we are continuing in self-control. We are in Chapter 7. For those of you who might just be joining us, we always encourage you to go back and at least look at the previous class to get you caught up to what we're going to be talking about this class, and then in your spare time, go back as far as you can, at least from the beginning, and work your way forward. And that will be a great starting point for you as we move forward in this, because after this book here, we're going to be getting into the respect unit that follows self-control. But just to kind of recap a little bit about what we covered in the previous classes, was not just my class, but the previous classes from the teachers who were before me as well. And we are in Chapter 7 of the Intermediate Series here, of Unit 3 of the Intermediate Series, Self-Control. And we are also still in Procedure 7. Now, I know I read that previously on the class that I taught Sunday, but we're still in that Procedure 7 because that covers pages 209 through 214, and we're only on page 211, which is where we're going to be picking up today. We covered page 210 Sunday, and we're moving forward here to page 211. Well, in the previous class, we talked a little bit about the dangers of feeding herbivores meat, right? Meat to animals. In this case, we're talking about in particular, the cows, the cattle industry, right? That's a pretty large industry that is used. Cows, a lot's used off of a cow. Lots used off of most animals that are used for food. Even the ones that aren't used for food, a lot is sometimes used off of those animals. But cows, everybody's familiar with cows, right? Most people like a great, hamburger every now and then, or a hot dog or something like that. Although hot dogs don't always have beef in them anymore. But a lot of companies have been made famous by their world-class hamburgers. But a lot is used in the cattle industry, right? Well, when farmers or ranchers take their animals to market, they're typically paid by the pound. And so one way in which scientists, ranchers, came up with a way to produce cheap feed was through the rendering of certain animal fats and proteins into cattle feed. Now, again, we're talking about animals that were designed specifically for eating plants, grass, hay, things of that nature. They're herbivores. They eat not meat, but plants, grass, and so forth. Well, as we covered in the previous classes, in the UK and Britain, someone had the great idea to introduce meat into the feed of animals. Now, a cow, generally speaking, would not engage in such activities, right? If a squirrel or a raccoon or a donkey or a pig, died out in the field, a cow's not going to just take the opportunity to get some free meat to bulk up, right? It's going to walk right by it, might even stay quite a distance away as it continues to feed off the land. The things that we're seeing here, and this is what we saw with the introduction of mad cow disease, was these are man-made, right? These were man-made, I don't want to say genetically modified because they were proteins more so, but these were man-made, I guess you can call it a man-made pollutant, okay? And we're gonna look back to, in fact, hold your spot right there, and let's look back to page, I had it marked down, but 188. Let's look back to page 188. Because this was something, this actually falls in the classification of a pollutant. Okay, now we have here two things, natural and man-made. And if you look at page 188 here, now we weren't talking about this right now, but it falls into that same category. We're talking about oil spills and things of that nature, you know, toxic chemicals that are dumped into the streams and the lakes and things like that. But let's look at the definition of pollution again. Pollution is the contamination of the environment with waste material. Now, if you remember, some of what was talked about previously was that when Britain realized that they had made a big boo-boo in feeding meat back to cattle, and the cattle started to suffer as a result of it. Of course, they have a much shorter lifespan than mankind does. It's about 5 years for cows. And they start showing symptoms. Once they start showing symptoms, then it's pretty much downhill from there, right? Same thing in humans, as we read or covered in the previous class. These symptoms are mirrored in humans just as in the cattle. Well, part of their solution was to incinerate that. And we also saw that in the video that we played in the previous class, right? Put these things, incinerate them, burn them. And of course, well, where do the ashes go of those incinerated cattle? Or anything that's burnt with fire, it goes up into the air. Well, we've got the trade winds like we covered last time, those prions that were a byproduct of cows eating meat that they were not designed to eat. You know, that created a change inside their body, right? The stomach or stomachs, wherever it occurred, however it occurred in their body, that created a prion, which, you know, you have proteins in the body. Everything needs prions to build bones and muscles, not prions, proteins to build bones and muscles and so forth. It's a part of the building blocks of life. But when the prion folds and duplicates itself and so forth, instead of creating more tissue, it actually left a hole. And in this case, it was left in the brain of the animal. When people ate the food, it left holes in the brains of mankind. Now, as it was said before, or has been said, you know, it's not just in the brain. These things are throughout the body, but the things that where it's noticed more is the brain, because the brain controls the functions of the body. And we saw some of those examples where, you know, you had a 12-year-old and, you know, a 20-year-old who died as a result of these things. And if you saw the video, you saw the things that they were suffering. Slurred speech, this was some of the description that at least their parents were given at the time. They suffered with slurred speech. They were not able to even walk anymore. You know, if they did go anywhere at the beginning stages of it, they needed assistance, and it got to the point where they couldn't walk at all. They had to be carried from one place to another. And then it got to the point where, because those holes continued to become more and more and more populous within the brain, well, their whole, they call it, I'm trying to think what it's called, sympathetic. The sympathetic nervous system, it just shut down. The autonomic, that's what it is. The autonomic nervous system, it just started shutting down. Now, that autonomic nervous system, it's responsible for controlling everything that you should be pretty thankful that you don't have to control. You know, your heartbeat, your blood pressure, you know, your respiration, your perspiration. You know, imagine having to think about controlling all of those things on a daily basis, right? You know, even in the wintertime, you still have to some degree, perspire. Your body generates heat 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Some of us generate more heat. Some of us generate a little less heat, you know, than others, but our bodies are continually generating heat. Think about digestion. Every time you put something in your mouth, before even you put something in your mouth, your body already starts the process from your mouth with increasing the amount of saliva to aid in the process of digestion once it gets into the stomach and, you know, makes its journey throughout the rest of the body. You know, your autonomic nervous system controls all of those processes, you know, and it starts in the brain, right? And the brain regulates and monitors the different systems in the body. And remember, William covered many classes back, the many systems that we have that control our body. Well, when those parts of the brain that control the different systems in the different areas in the body start to get holes in them, and you can really kind of almost look at it from a linear standpoint. Imagine reading this book and somebody came through with a big hole punch and just started punching holes in the pages, right? You're going to miss important parts or information that's in the book, and you're not going to have all the facts. Well, when your brain does not have all the facts to do its job, it might give a little bit too much of this, not enough of the other, and then you have problems where the speech is slurred, you see the drool of the mouth, the body shakes, it twitches uncontrollably, they go to the bathrooms on themselves, and eventually everything else just shuts down. No more heartbeat, no more breathing, no more, electrical pulses throughout the body to keep everything functioning. And that is the result of a man-made, just one aspect. Now think about that's just one aspect of something that mankind has done in not practicing self-control in regards to how he interacted within his environment, or as we covered in the character unit. Hold your place right there. We'll come back to pollution in a little bit here. But when mankind does not practice morality, right? Morality. Now, we covered on page 8 of the character unit that morality can be divided into 3 basic categories: behavior and attitude towards all life. Now, that's human, animal, and plant. This thing that we're talking about here and what we're covering in this chapter here on these few pages, they cover all aspects, right? Because humans, animals, and plants have been affected in a negative way as a result of just feeding cows something that they were never designed to eat. And like I said in the class on Sunday, that when the rules are broken in regards to how we treat and interact with things within our environment, right? Because even if a person does not know the rules, it doesn't mean that there's not a rule. You drive through, you go into a new city or a new state or a new country, and you don't obey the traffic rules, right? You might be a little ignorant of it because it's a little bit different. You're still guilty of breaking the rule, okay? And when the rules are broken, they create consequences. In this case, we've seen it in the humans, in the animals, and in the plants, which animals rely on the plants, right? Even if they just stopped, and as we covered in the previous class, even with just the stopping of that act, right, that practice of feeding rendered animals back to cattle, you still have that tail, that long tail of the effects that don't go away instantly, the ripple effect, right? And it gets into the plants, and everything requires plants. Whether it's things that the animals eat, or whether it's things that we eat. We eat plants, right? We eat potatoes, we eat carrots, lettuce, and things like that. And even if we don't directly eat them, as we're going to get into today on page 211, so many other things depend on the plants that are grown from the ground to give us other things that we might consume. So another category of morality is behavior and attitude towards possession and property, and of course the environment, which is also a part of what we're talking about here. Now, just on that paragraph right underneath there, it says moral principles in regards to human life means acknowledging and accepting that life is valuable. Now, that's something that has to be disregarded when people make decisions, negative decisions, that negatively impact society, the people in society, animals, life, plants, and so forth in society. But in regards to people, if you don't value life, then you don't mind making decisions, or as they call it, collateral damage, making decisions that might bring about collateral damage, in the name of science. Some people are going to lose their lives as a result. Some people actually look at the world as their laboratory, right? And they'll experiment with the populace instead of just like in a laboratory with cells and so forth. And it says here, life means acknowledging and accepting that moral principles in regards to human life means acknowledging and accepting that life is valuable and all people have the potential to contribute to society. When you have a moral attitude towards others, you accept and appreciate that they have the right to live in peace, safety, and security. And in part of those videos, you saw that the peace of those people who had family members who suffered this Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, it took away their peace. It took away their sense of safety, and it took away their security. Okay, because even in regards to the little girls, they question. You're talking about 9, 10, 11-year-old children, scrutinizing, ingredient labels on panels because they're deathly afraid to eat anything that might have beef in it, right? Gelatin, bone meal, things of that nature, because they witnessed firsthand what occurred to their sister. Okay, and that was the 12-year-old girl who died from Creutzfeldt-Jakob. On page 9 here of chapter 1 of the character unit, let's see, 1, 2, 3, it's the third paragraph down. It says, moral principles can also be applied to the environment and how we care for it. Now, we need air, water, plants, and animals to survive. And all of these things make up our environment. When everyone does their part to care for our environment by not polluting the earth, okay, so remember, we cover what this part of this pollution is here. Not polluting the earth or using harsh man-made chemicals. Now, notice here in this paragraph, it says when everybody does their part by not polluting the earth, it doesn't say by using harsh man-made chemicals, but it says or using harsh man-made chemicals. So there's a lot more pollutants that can go into the earth outside of harsh man-made chemicals, okay? And these prions are one of the things that was a man-made product, a man-made, designed by man. Maybe they weren't intending it for it to be a prion, but that's what occurred as a result of the choices that they made, and it's a pollutant. To care for our environment by not polluting or using harsh man-made chemicals that contaminate our atmosphere and water, we are demonstrating regard for life. Within our lifetime, the responsibility to our planet and its resources will define our concern for future generations. In addition to this, we can also display a moral attitude towards animals by treating them kindly and not condoning any form of animal cruelty. And in fact, I would classify the feeding of meat to animals as animal cruelty. If you remember what was shown there in those videos that both William and I played, those poor cows, a cow's life is not extremely long. Cows don't live 100 years, and, grow gray hair and so forth and see their grandchildren down to the 10th generation and, sit back on a rocking chair and drink, iced tea and watch the sunset. A cow's life is pretty short. But in their own mind, in their own life, they have an enjoyable life. I never seen a cow walking around depressed. They enjoy their life. They eat their food. They enjoy their family with their calves and so forth. And they chew the cud and they do their part in a ecosystem that brings benefit to mankind as well. Okay? But with the introduction of what we saw here in these last several classes, it brought cruelty to those animals. The cows are just one, right? Animal cruelty disregards the fact that every animal has a purpose that benefits mankind. And I think sometimes people forget that every animal, even the ones we don't eat, some people are extremely cruel to animals like dogs and cats and, turtles or whatever the case might be. I've seen people go down the road and actually, swerve their cars in order to try to hit the cat or the dog that's crossing the road or smash the turtle that was crossing the road. Now you should never endanger your life when you're going down the road and an animal crosses the road, and you could do more damage in trying to avoid the animal than you can in actually hitting it, unless it's a big moose or something like that, or an elephant, but we don't have those in Texas unless they're in zoos. But some people actually go out of their way to try to do harm to animals. Okay, this is a character trait that we have to be mindful of. So they benefit mankind, the earth, and the food supply, because it's not just us what we eat; it's also those animals that have a job, right? The even the scavenger animals, even the sharks. Sharks have a pretty bad name. Nobody wants to be around a shark, and sharks have a job to do, right? So do lobsters and snails and crabs and so forth. A lot of those animals are classified as scavengers, and they have a part to do in cleaning up the waters. Like catfish, right? They have a part and they clean up the waters. And you also have land animals, land-based animals that do the same thing. They clean up the earth. They go and they eat the carcasses. Around here we have big turkey vultures and other scavenger type birds that'll swirl around in the sky. And you know that if you see those birds swirling around, they've honed in on a scent of some type of a dead animal or something. And I've even seen going down the road, you know, in times past, animals, and I've had to pass that area several times, and those birds, they'll be eaten, and they'll eventually pick that thing clean, right? And they do a pretty great job at it. And so, imagine destroying those animals because we don't like them, right? Because we don't like the way they look or the way that they smell or the way they make the neighborhood look or whatever the case might be, right? Will take an important part out of the ecosystem, and it will in fact affect mankind as well. So animal cruelty disregards the fact that every animal has a purpose that benefits mankind, the earth, and the food supply. They must be kept alive, speaking of these animals here. In addition, we need to watch out for their health, and this was something that was not done with the mad cow. Every year, animals are neglected, abused, tortured, and killed for sport rather than for food. And there have been numerous studies done that show that many serial killers engage in immoral acts towards animals by torturing and dismembering them prior to murdering human beings. All right, so just remember that there, and now how that ties in is sometimes you have to go back with your students, and just kind of remind them that everything that we're learning is not completely independent, right? Remember, these character traits, these lessons that we're going through, these 5 books that we're covering in the intermediate series, even all the way back to the beginning of the early learning in the elementary series, the beginners, they're all building blocks. They're all building up towards a particular theme, okay? So every lesson ties into the previous one, and you can easily tie in a lesson all the way back, 2 or 3 books back, to the lesson that you're covering right now. So back on page 188 in the 7th chapter, Unit 3, Self-Control, it says pollution causes potential damage to the environment, human health, and overall quality of life. Pollutants can basically be placed into 2 categories. Natural pollutants, such as sewage, decompose usually over a period of time. Naturally occurring pollutants will not cause excessive harm to life because the earth has the ability to repair itself. Now, it won't cause excessive harm to life if it's disposed of properly, okay? You can't just go, take a dump out in the field and do that every day, and, a million people do that, put their waste out on the ground and it not do harm. Okay, because eventually what occurs, you get rain, you get water, you get things like that. That water is going to run around that waste. It's going to get into the water supply. You're going to go to your tap, turn on the water, and you're going to drink it. Or you're going to go to your well and pull out water from there, and you're going to get that waste back into your system. Okay, what goes around comes around. So, they, generally speaking, don't cause excessive harm because the earth has the ability to repair itself. So it has to be disposed of properly so the earth can break it down, okay? And then you have man-made pollutants. They either decompose slowly or not at all. And if you remember what some of the previous teachers talked about, the PFAS and things like that, these chemicals, as science has recently classified them as forever chemicals because they don't break down. They don't go anywhere. They stay circulating in the environment forever, okay? They don't break down at all. Once they contaminate the environment, it is virtually impossible to remove them. And some of the things that fall into this classification, and thinking about what we've been covering over the last 3 or 4 classes, you can write prions, genetically modified organisms, harsh pesticides, and herbicides. Those things have a lingering effect on the earth and the human body, right? Because you can't just wash these things off of your fruits and vegetables when you go and get them from the store. A lot of these things are, and we're going to get into that, they're modified genetically for these pesticides and herbicides to actually be a part of the DNA of the fruit and the vegetable. Now you think about how we talked about how the earth is alive, right? And we think about everything that's on the earth, then it has life. It has life in it. It has microorganisms that we can't see, but those microorganisms have a particular job to do. Now, organically speaking, the information that's contained in the DNA of, or the genes of those plants, once they get into our bodies are able to pick and choose pieces, proteins here and minerals here and vitamins here and other fiber and things like that, pieces that are beneficial for our body, and it goes into us, and then it places everything in the proper place that it needs to go, and it does benefit for mankind. Some of it we store, some of it we use immediately, some of it gets washed out. Okay, now what occurs when these foods have different instructions in them, right? Because remember, the genes are a set of instructions, okay? And then they get into our bodies. Now those instructions are a lot different. And this is where we're seeing a lot, an increase or a rise, and we'll get into some of the articles here, and food allergies that have taken place, and they coincide with the invention and the use of genetically modified organisms, genetically modified foods, and so forth. It says, although some pollution is a result of natural causes, such as the eruption of volcanoes that spew enormous amounts of smoke and ash into the atmosphere, the majority of pollution is the result of human activities. And that's exactly what we're talking about here in Chapter 7. All right, so we covered a little bit of that. We talked about prions as a result of bovine, and the result was the bovine spongiform encephalopathy. That's what you see in cows, Creutzfeldt-Jakob in humans, and chronic wasting in deer, scapies in sheep and goats, and of course the whirling in the fish. Now we didn't get to show any of the videos of that, but all of those categories, they all are a part of that spongiform encephalopathy. Okay, whirling, scapies, Creutzfeldt-Jakob, wasting deer disease, and so forth. And I didn't get to read it last time, but I have the article here with me right now, so I'll read it. We talk a little bit about, William did, for sure, in his class, so it was covered, how BSC, or bovine spongiform encephalopathy, and Alzheimer are linked together. This article here says, Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease is a rare, degenerative, fatal brain disorder. It affects about one person in every million per year worldwide in the United States. And in the United States, there are about 350 cases per year. Now, this is what they're classifying as CJD, okay? Now, Alzheimer's worldwide cases, there are nearly 44 million people that have Alzheimer or a related type of dementia. If you remember, William talked about the different types of dementia. Only 1 in 4 people with Alzheimer's disease have been diagnosed in America, that is, diagnosed. So it's more than likely, probably at least double that who actually have it. Alzheimer's and dementia is most common in Western Europe, that is North America, Western Europe, and North America is close behind. Now, in that same article, it says Alzheimer's and CJD are part, so they're both part of a spectrum of diseases called transmissible spongiform encephalopathy, or TSE. The operative word is transmissible. This is what they say in the article. A variety of factors can trigger neurodegenerative disease, including genetics, they say head trauma, and neurotoxins. I guess head trauma in regards to the fact that it can unlock something that's already existing in your body. Now, if you bump your head, now you're going to get TSE. No, it doesn't work that way. It has to be a cause for it, a cause for a protein that's entered the body in some way, shape, or form that creates these holes. Head trauma might speed it up, Okay. Neurotoxins might speed it up. It might open the doorway for it to continue to or to move faster throughout the body, just like certain STDs, as we covered in the previous classes. Certain STDs, they open the doorway for other viruses to move really faster, move a lot faster in the body and take hold, where otherwise the immune system would have been strong enough to fight it off in the case of HIV and AIDS. All right. Another point here, scientists say that we could still be eating meat from prions, with prions from the mid 90s, and the incubation period could increase to 40 or 50 years before symptoms actually show. So you remember what we covered on page 210 and what was pretty much thought to be the case back in 2003, in the mid 90s and so forth, that the incubation period was about 10 to 15 years. Well, now they're showing that it actually could be upwards of 40 to 50 years before symptoms actually start to show. Despite that fact, there are no cures for it. The best cure is prevention in these regards. It says these are all results of not practicing self-control. Let's see here. What did I want to cover there? Okay, no, we already covered that. All right, so now we're going to continue in this this book here, this chapter 7 here. On page 211. And we're going to start at the very top. So that just kind of gives us a little bit of a review of what we covered in the last few classes. And if you look here at the very top, it says, it really does not make a lot of sense to spray poisons. Now, remember what we covered on page 188 in regards to pollutants. You have some natural. In this regards, we're talking about things that are man-made. These poisons, these herbicides, these pesticides, and so forth. These are poisons that are actually willfully and on purpose being sprayed on foods that we need to eat in order to stay alive. And remember, the whole premise behind this was to create more pest-resistant foods so that we can have more abundant crops. Okay, something that we can actually continuously duplicate, and as a result, you can make a lot of money with it, right? Because what does it cost to plant a particular plant next to a crop that helps to fight off a bug or a certain pest or something, or to use something that naturally occurs in the environment? You see that a lot in nature, where you might have a poison ivy plant. There's usually another plant that's the antidote to the poison ivy, or some other thing that grows in nature. There's another plant that grows close by that kind of is an antidote to that poison that you might get from that plant, or oil that you might get from that plant that could be an irritant. Well, mankind wants the quick and easy way. Plus, he wants the way that he can make a lot of money in doing it as well, right? Because there's no money really in using naturopathic things. So we see here underneath there, it says the saga continues. The saga continues. It's interesting. This word saga here is, it means a long history about past events over a long period of time. A long history about past events over a long period of time. And if you think about it, we've been dealing with the mad cow since 1985, right? It started long before it was recognized, but the introduction of it into the human species was at least at that point, and then the cows too. It was a big fly. Alzheimer's was discovered in 1906, okay? So quite a long time, right, that we've been dealing with these things. But these are neurodegenerative diseases. So let's see here. It says, even if you are not particularly fond of vegetables, you still rely on the agricultural industry in more ways than you can imagine. And I'm just trying to find just want to make sure I got this in order here. Got some slides I want to show. All right. So you still rely on the agricultural industry in more ways than you can imagine. Crops such as wheat, corn, and soy are used in many foods. So if you enjoy tacos and pizza, for instance, consider that even these foods are made up of ingredients that first had to be grown. Now, I think every single one of us are pretty much aware of the fact that all of our food has to be grown. We're past the point to think that food just grows in the grocery store, right? Like the person that thought that milk just came from cartons. They didn't know it came from actual cows, right? They thought that was just like the mascot for the milk. No, I mean it has to be grown in some way, shape, or form, which means you have to have land to grow that food on. You have to have farmers and farm workers to plant and nurture and harvest that food and so forth. Or in the case of milk, you have to have a way to extract that milk from the cows or butcher the meat from the cows or the sheep or goats or whatever the case might be, the chickens. But it's a huge industry, right? And they classify all these things, the meat, the milk, the wheat, the plant foods that we eat, carrots, potatoes, all of that, seeds, legumes, beans and things of that nature. They're all classified in the agricultural industry, okay? And these are so essential, and including the things that we don't eat, right? Like, the cotton that makes up our clothes, right? These are all a part of the things that come from the agricultural industry because cotton grows in the ground. Even linen grows in the ground. It comes from flax. Silk, that's a whole nother thing, but the silkworm, and a lot of silk is synthetic nowadays, but that is a naturally occurring byproduct, okay? If that bug or that worm is not able to have clean and healthy food, I have a feeling that the silk that it produces, if any at all, is going to be compromised as a result. So it says the diet of the world's inhabitants is agriculturally based. People worldwide depend on produce from the earth to make up the bulk of their diet. Just how much that is, let's see here. If you put up the first slide there, it shows here. Now this is just from the United States. I didn't get the numbers on the entire world, but this is just from the United States in regards to the worth of agriculture in terms of numbers. Okay, you can't really put a worth or a value on your necessities, right? Because these are things that people need to survive. We've seen, if you've paid any attention to the news in regards to the war that's taking place in between Russia and Ukraine, and how the wheat industry was hit, because Ukraine, that area, produces a large amount of wheat, right? In between those two areas, Russia and Ukraine. Well, the exports of that, was pretty much cut way down, okay? And it's affected a lot of people. It's affected the wheat prices as well. It affected a lot of countries that desperately depend on those continual shipments coming in because these are staples. Wheat, corn, things of that nature. These are what are considered staples to life. People can make bread and things like that to survive from these resources. But the U.S. agriculture worth, it says agriculture, food, and related industries contributed $1.055 trillion, that's $1 trillion, to the U.S. gross domestic product, or the GDP, in 2020. And that's a 5% share, that is, to our complete GDP. The output of America's farms contributed $134.7 billion of this sum, and that's about 0.6% of the GDP. Now, sectors related to agriculture include food and beverage manufacturing, food and beverage stores, food service and eating food service and eating and drinking places, textiles, apparel, and leather products. That's something else. You get shoes, you wear clothes or your jackets, gloves, you drive a car that has leather interior, that has to come from an animal. And of course, forestry and fishing, because we use lumber pretty much for everything here in the United States. And then the last point there, it says in 2020, 19.7 million full and part-time jobs were related to the agricultural and food sectors. That is 10.3% of total U.S. employment. So you can see that a lot is dependent on the agricultural industry, right? Even the things that we don't realize play a part in it, they do. Now it says here, continuing on page 211, we're in the second paragraph. It says, sadly, insects and weeds destroy a large percentage of crops yearly. Insects and weeds destroy a large percentage of crops yearly. Since our diet depends on agriculture, scientists have been determined to find ways to reduce the loss of crops. Let me see here. I just wanted to make sure I don't skip anything. Oh, and I did. All right, before we move forward in that, let's go back a little bit to our agriculture here just to show a little bit. And then this is, some of this is, let me see here. Yeah, some of this is just the U.S., a little bit of it globally. If we look at the second slide, I believe that's agricultural industry, and this is just from the United States. Okay, just so again, how dependent we are on these things. And remember how when our activities in our regards to our behavior and attitude towards our environment or life is brings about negativity, right? Or it's done in a negative way. It done in a way that brings about negative consequences. This is the entire sector that it's affecting. In the United States, farms, okay, because you have to have places to grow food. You can't grow corn out of asphalt, right? You have to have healthy soil in order to grow these things. It says the number of farms in the United States stands at about 2,012,050, and this was the numbers that were taken in 2021. The average farm size is 445 acres. Oh, I didn't put that there. Well, skip that point 3 there. The fourth one is the value is in vegetables, beans, and mushrooms. Now, these are plants, $36.5 billion annually. Okay, this is how much is produced and sold. Some of it's exported and so forth. In regards to beef production, in pounds of meat, you're looking at 27.17 billion pounds of meat. All right. Now, think about this, because this is what a part of what the some of the countries were, and some of the people in Britain were pretty upset about when this discovery of bovine, the BSE, took place, because those cattle ranchers didn't want to lose out on those funds, right? And we're not, I don't know if we'll bring it out here. I'm not, maybe another teacher might, but you know, we had in the United States, a very famous talk show host, Oprah Winfrey. She was pushed on pretty hard because she spoke out about some things in regards to the beef industry, the cattle industry, you know, and they pushed back at her pretty hard. Now, what she spoke, you know, were based on some facts that were presented to her. She was educated on some things, and she made some statements, you know, and because of that influence, there was a lot of pushback that I forget, libel. I think it's libel that places can actually sue you for, because if it can cause damage to their profits, right, or their reputation. Okay, so there were lawsuits that were There were lawsuits that were brought against her because of these things. Okay, but in Britain, as it was brought forth in the articles in the video, for quite a long time, there were still many countries that were being sent this contaminated bone meal. Okay, and bone meal is used in a lot of cases. It might be used in foods, but bone meal is also used in the agricultural industry as a protein that's put into the earth. It's mixed into the earth, and it's used to help to, you know, grow plants and so forth. That bone meal that was infected with those prions, right? So they were frustrated about that, because it came to light that although they had banned the use of it here in their country, in Britain, they were still joyfully sending it out to other people, right? That's something that is harmful to life. That shows a lack of morality towards all life. And these are some of the things that you can just point these things out to your students. You can show them these things, even coming all the way from the character unit. You can bring them back to that information and show them that these are real life examples of immorality in daily affairs. So you look at that, 27.17 billion pounds. This is just in the United States, right? There's a lot of places that produce beef in the UK and South America. Argentina is very known for their beef. Brazil is also known for their beef, and so forth. Chickens, 518.2 million chickens in the U.S. 2020, a part of that in the agricultural industry. Milk production in pounds, 226.2 billion pounds of milk. And of course, the largest crop, I was going to give that to you for a quiz earlier there. The largest crop is actually soybeans with 4.453 billion bushels. Excuse me. Now, a bushel is approximately 32 quarts, and they measure bushels in volume, not weight. Okay, and of course, the leading vegetable state is California. Now, if you've watched the news and paid any attention to California, they've been going through a severe drought, right? Which has dramatically decreased the amount of crops, foods, that we depend on, that a lot of people depend on, being put out on the market, which has, of course, raised the prices. Lower supply, increased demand, higher prices for those foods. And that's a result of really no water. Let's see here. I think we'll skip that next slide. And if we go to the last slide there, and this talks about wheat production globally. As far as wheat globally produced by pretty much all countries that produce wheat, 749,467,531 tons, with China being the largest wheat producer in the world, producing over 131 million tons production volume every year. So we see that, it's not just one country, right, that contributes to the food supply. It's many, many countries collectively working together to provide food and sustenance for mankind. When all parties follow the rules in regards to growing and harvesting and maintaining healthy food, then everybody benefits. But all it takes is one person to not follow those rules, to do something that brings harm, and it can affect the entire industry. So it says here, in regards to these pests, it says chemical sprays and genetically modified crops are just two ways to combat insects and weeds. Chemical sprays include insecticides, some which can kill insects by destroying their nervous systems, and herbicides, which either poison the roots, leaves, or the entire plant. Now think about that, because these are things. Have you ever, I think we all have. Have you ever sprayed like a body spray or an aftershave on your body? You get out of the shower, you trim up your beard or something like that, and you take some aftershave and put it on your face. I'm not talking about you young boys down there. I don't think you've done that yet, right? But you've done that, right? Where does that water go? Where does that liquid go? It gets absorbed into your skin, right? You put a little lotion on, especially in the wintertime when it's a little bit drier. You put that lotion on. It doesn't just sit on your skin. It gets absorbed into the skin, right? Well, plants have skin too, okay? And when these things are sprayed onto the plant, it gets absorbed into the root of the plant, the meat of the plant, okay? And then when we as consumers get that food at the market or at the store, we eat that. Well, again, like I said, it's not just something that you can wash off, right? Because it's actually a part of the plant now. Now, that's just the things that are sprayed on the plant, okay? Some of these things are GM or genetically modified things that actually are done in the lab at one point, and then the seed is reproduced and sold so that now it's a part of the plant. It's got herbicides in it. It has pesticides in it. What do you think is going to occur when we eat those things? All right. We see here that a part of these chemicals destroy the nervous system of the bug. All right. Well, what do bugs? What is the nervous system made of? It's made of many smaller little particles that do a job. Right. We can't see those little microscopic particles that make up the nervous system, sending messages back and forth at the speed of light from the brain to the organ, or the brain to the limb, or the brain to the eye, or whatever the case, but they have a job to do. But when those bugs, their job is hampered, they can't do it. It's like they can't get the signal to tell the heart to breathe, or the lungs to expand, or the blood to get rid of or to absorb oxygen and take it to the different places in the body. Well, when these things build up in the body of people. And there's been case evidence of showing people who work around these farms where these things are sprayed on. And I know there's videos out there to show this. It actually can build up in the person's body. And it can build to the point where they actually suffer the same thing that the insect that they were trying to kill starts to suffer. They start to suffer neurological damage in their bodies. Okay, and there's been many other cases with certain types of cancers that take place, and problems in the digestive system and things of that nature as well. Well, although both of these methods kill weeds and insects, many question the safety and wisdom of using products on food that have been known to have harmful effects on people, fish, and other wildlife. In addition to this, these chemicals contaminate water by seeping into the ground or by runoff. Let me see here. I want to show a little bit about some of these things, these chemicals, because herbicides, all right? We have herbicides and pesticides and genetically modified foods. Herbicides, now there was a big company called Monsanto. They recently got bought out by someone else. They were in the news a lot because everyone who's ever been to any type of hardware store or any place where you can buy, I guess, fertilizers, for crops. Roundup is I can't remember what the whoever the parent company of Monsanto is, but I can't remember the name of the company. But everybody's heard of Roundup, right? They have weed killers that you can spray in your driveway to kill those little pesky weeds growing up from between your, cracks in your driveway. And they have things that can be sprayed on plants. Okay, well, some of the side effects of this product, which has been documented and found with many, many people over the years, and this is not anything new, are colitis, heart disease, inflammatory bowel disease, or leaky gut syndrome. In other words, what's supposed to stay in your gut actually starts to leak out through the walls of your gut and start to contaminate your system. Right now, in very small amounts, you might not notice as much. You might just notice a little bit of sluggishness or being a little tired, or don't have the energy that you used to, and things of that nature. But in certain cases, it can get so bad to where that could actually open up and start just dumping toxins into your body, and you can go into sepsis. Another effect of this herbicide is liver disease, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, which is a cancer of the lymph nodes, part of it, reproductive problems, either not being able to reproduce. Some families have gone sterile, both men and women, and some people have had issues and as far as cancers and defects in their reproductive organs or in their offspring, okay, their children, reproductive issues there. Respiratory illnesses are also a part of it as well. And it's interesting because with the onset of these chemicals and also genetically modified organisms, which these herbicides and pesticides are also genetically modified to be bred into the crops, this is where you've seen an increase also in allergies. I don't know anybody who's ever had an allergy before. I know I suffer from them occasionally, and they really suck, to say the least, But this here, I just want to read this real quick. It says the situation brought, talking about GM foods and allergies, it says the situation brought attention to issues with GM foods, namely food allergies, which are dramatically on the rise. According to the Centers for Disease Control, between 1997 and 2007, food allergies in the United States increased nearly 20%, with peanut allergies nearly tripling during that same time period, which also corresponds directly to the rise in the 4 most commonly planted GMO seeds in the United States. And so they have actual documented evidence to show that the rise in food. I remember when I was going to school, and people who probably been in the school, in school 10, 15, 20 years before me, I don't hardly ever remember anybody being allergic to milk. I don't remember anybody being allergic to peanuts. I don't remember people being allergic to, I think I've always been allergic to mayonnaise because I don't like mayonnaise. No, I'm just joking. It's not an allergy. It's just a personal preference or lack thereof. But people didn't have these allergies growing up, right? But now you have to be extremely careful about the foods that you give to someone. And manufacturers have gotten to the point where they have made a law where you actually have to label, may contain tree nuts or may contain nuts or may contain milk or whatever the case might be, or manufactured in a facility that also processes this particularly well-known allergen. Okay. And that's how bad it's gotten over the years. And people have to walk around with EpiPens and things of that nature because they can go into anaphylactic shock and otherwise. So these four most commonly planted GMO seeds in the U.S. is corn, soy, canola, and cotton. Is there a connection between them genetically, between genetically modified foods and allergies? Well, the article goes on to show that there is actually a connection, as we just got finished reading there, between those two. Again, these are just two tiny little points in regards to a lack of self-control in our environment. We see here the instance with cows, with the mad cow, and the instance with our plants and herbicides, pesticides, and GMOs. Okay, and more will be covered with the next teacher. Get a little bit more into detail with this, but keep in mind that when, as I mentioned before, when the rules are not followed and morality is not used in regards to farming practices or any agricultural practice, you can pretty much be certain that harm is going to be the result of it. Okay. For thousands of years, people have been raising animals and plants, and they've been doing things naturally to strengthen the breed of a plant or breed of an animal, and they've never brought any harm. Well, now mankind is, through his great technology and his great understanding of science, is now doing a number on that. And we're starting to see a lot more illness and sickness in the earth and in our bodies as well. Well, this is something that we're actually learning so that we can turn around one day, because once you have this knowledge, you actually have the power to make educated choices, but choices that benefit not only yourself, but others as well. So we're going to stop right there on page 211, right about the middle of that paragraph there. And David's going to be our next teacher for the next class, which is going to be this upcoming Sunday. If I'm not mistaken, I believe it's the 20th. Yes, 11:20 at 5:30 Central Standard Time. Again, thank you for joining us for this class, and we look forward to seeing you at the next class. Everyone have a wonderful day.